The first sound is not applause, it's the quiet rustle of paper. A Nigerian citizen stands at a counter inside a government office, holding a freshly printed gazette, the official law of the land. The ink is new. The seal is real. The title says tax law. Yet something feels wrong. Because what's written on those pages is not what the people's representatives say they voted for. Now pause for a moment and imagine this happening where you live. Imagine Congress debates a bill line by line. Page 1, page 2, page 3. Amendments proposed. Clauses removed, others added, votes counted. The bill passes. The Speaker gavels it through. The Senate harmonizes it. The executive signs. Everything looks orderly, democratic, proper. Then one day you go to the market or the Ministry of Information and buy the official copy of that law. And it's not the same law. That is the moment this story begins. Inside Nigeria's House of Representatives, a lawmaker rises under parliamentary privilege. His voice is calm, but his words land like thunder. He says he spent 3 days reviewing the gazetted copy of the tax law. He compared it with the House's official vote and proceedings. He checked the Senate's harmonized version. He even went the extra mile to buy the published copy himself. And what he found shocked him. What I passed on this floor, he tells the chamber, is not what is gazetted. No shouting, no drama. Just a devastating accusation. The law being sold to Nigerians is not the law their representatives approved. For a country where millions already struggle under rising taxes, 15%, 18%, 23%, even 25%. This isn't a technical error. It's a breach of trust, a constitutional red line, a warning sign that something deeper may be broken. So here's the question we must ask quietly, honestly, and without excuses. If a law can be changed after elected representatives vote, who is really governing? And if taxpayers have no guarantee that the rules they follow are real, how long can any democracy survive? If you believe transparency still matters, please share this story. If you believe accountability should never be negotiable, subscribe. And tell us in the comments, would this be acceptable anywhere in a true democracy? Before the outrage, before the accusations, before the word breach was ever spoken on the floor, there was a process, a long one, a tedious one, the kind of process lawmakers often point to when they want citizens to believe that democracy is working as it should. According to members of Nigeria's House of Representatives, the tax bill did not appear overnight. It was not rushed through in darkness. It was debated again and again. Page by page, clause by clause, amendments proposed, amendments rejected, some sections removed entirely, others added after heated discussion. This wasn't guesswork, this wasn't hearsay. This was the formal legislative routine Nigerians are told to trust. For days, lawmakers sat through deliberations. Page 1 was examined, page 2 followed, then page 3, 4, 5, 6, each section scrutinized, each decision recorded. When disagreements arose, they were debated. When compromises were reached, they were noted. Eventually, the House agreed. A final version emerged. Votes were taken. Names were called. Ballots counted. The bill passed. From there, the process moved exactly as the Constitution prescribes. The approved version went forward for harmonization with the Senate. Differences were reconciled. Language aligned. Another vote. Another confirmation. Once both chambers agreed, the document was transmitted to the executive arm of government. Signatures followed. The final step remained gazetting the official publication of the law so it could be enforced and obeyed by the public. At least that's how it was supposed to end. For most lawmakers, the story should have stopped there. The system had done its job. Their duty was complete. Nigerians, they believed, would soon see the same law they had debated printed, sealed, and sold as the binding rule of the land. But then curiosity turned into concern. One member of the House decided to look again, not casually, not out of routine. He spent 3 full days examining the gazetted copy of the tax law, the version officially released to the public. He compared it with the House's vote and proceedings. He cross-checked it against the Senate's harmonized record. He even took the extra step of personally purchasing the gazetted document from the Ministry of Information, the very copy being sold to ordinary Nigerians. What he saw did not match. Sections were different. Provisions appeared altered, language no longer aligned with what had been debated and approved. This was not a matter of formatting or clerical error. According to him, it was something far more serious. The law Nigerians were being asked to obey was not the law the legislature had passed. That realization did not come with shouting or theatrics. It came with restraint and with gravity. When he rose on the floor of the House under parliamentary privilege, his words were deliberate. He reminded his colleagues that his vote had been counted, that he had been present during deliberations, that he had participated fully in the legislative process, and yet the document now bearing the authority of law told a different story. "I am seeing something completely different," he told the chamber. This was not an opposition stunt. It was not a media performance. It was a procedural alarm. By invoking privilege, he made it clear that the issue cut to the heart of the institution itself. If the gazetted law differed from what was passed, then something had gone wrong after lawmakers had done their job. And that is where the main event truly lies. Not in politics, not in personality, but in a single unsettling possibility that somewhere between legislative approval and public publication, the will of elected representatives may have been altered. In a democracy, that possibility is not minor, it is foundational. And once raised, once spoken aloud, it cannot simply be ignored. The Speaker acknowledged the concern. He assured the House that action would be taken. But in that moment, no explanation was offered. No documents were produced. No immediate correction announced. Only a question remained, hanging heavily in the chamber and soon across the nation. What exactly had been changed, and who had the power to change it? The room did not erupt when the allegation was made. There were no shouts, no chaos, no dramatic walkouts. Instead, there was something far more unsettling. Silence. Inside Nigeria's House of Representatives, lawmakers sat still as the implications of the statement settled in. This was not a policy disagreement. This was not a partisan clash. What had just been raised was a direct challenge to the integrity of the lawmaking process itself. The lawmaker did not accuse anyone by name. He did not speculate publicly. He did not point fingers. He simply laid out facts methodically, almost painfully calm. He explained that he had reviewed the official vote and proceedings of the House. He had checked the Senate's harmonized records. He had examined the gazetted version, the one Nigerians were being asked to obey. And after days of comparison, one conclusion became unavoidable. They were not the same. That moment marked the true climax of the story. Because in that instant, the problem stopped being about a tax bill and became about something far larger: control over the law itself. In any functioning democracy, the power to make laws rests with elected representatives. Once a bill is debated, amended, voted on, and passed, its content should be settled. Publication is meant to be a formality, not an opportunity for revision. When that boundary is crossed, when words shift after votes are counted, the entire structure begins to wobble. The lawmaker knew this. That is why he invoked parliamentary privilege. It was not done lightly. Privilege exists for moments exactly like this, when the institution must protect itself from erosion. This is a breach of the Constitution, he told the House. A breach of laws, a breach of trust, a breach of the mandate given to every person sitting in that chamber. He did not move a motion. He did not call for immediate sanctions. Instead, he made a plea, one that revealed how serious the situation truly was. He asked that all documents be brought before the committee of the whole, that every member see side by side what was passed on the floor and what was printed for the public. Only then, he said, could the House understand the scale of what had happened and make the necessary corrections. The Speaker responded carefully. His words were measured. He acknowledged the observation. He assured the House that action would be taken, but there was no explanation. And that absence spoke volumes, because when a discrepancy of this magnitude emerges, silence becomes part of the story. The lack of immediate clarification raised new questions, ones that extended beyond the chamber walls and into the lives of ordinary Nigerians. If lawmakers themselves could not recognize the law being sold to the public, how could citizens be expected to trust it? Outside the legislature, the reaction was not quiet. The outrage took a different form: raw, direct, and deeply personal. For many Nigerians, taxes are not an abstract policy debate. They are a daily burden. Money taken from salaries already stretched thin, fees paid without visible return, promises made then forgotten, and now on top of that, the fear that the rules themselves may be shifting without consent. The video's narrator does not hide his frustration. He speaks not as a politician, but as a taxpayer, someone who expects that when he pays the law, guiding that payment is real, fixed, and honest. He links the alleged manipulation of the tax law to a broader pattern. Nigerians know too well officials resigning quietly when caught, no prosecutions, no asset recovery, no accountability. Resign softly, disappear, enjoy the loot. Meanwhile, the people continue to pay. The climax then is not just the speech on the floor, it is the collision between two realities. On one side, a lawmaker insisting that something fundamental has gone wrong. On the other, a public exhausted by a system that seems designed to protect itself rather than the people it serves. By the time the speaker's gavel brought the moment to a close, truth had already escaped the chamber. This was no longer a legislative dispute. It was a crisis of credibility. And once credibility is shaken, reassurance alone is never enough. When laws lose clarity, the first casualty is not politics, it is ordinary life. For millions of Nigerians, taxation is not a line item on a spreadsheet. It is money deducted before rent is paid, before school fees are settled, before medical bills are faced. Each percentage, 15%, 18%, 23%, even 25% cuts directly into survival. And people accept that burden for one reason alone: the belief that the rules are fixed, transparent, and lawful. That belief is now under strain. If the law printed and sold to the public does not match what elected representatives approved, then the social contract begins to fracture. Citizens are no longer just taxpayers. They become subjects of uncertainty, never fully sure which rules apply or who has the authority to change them. The civil consequence is quiet but corrosive distrust. People stop believing explanations. They stop listening to justifications. They stop expecting fairness. And when trust disappears, compliance follows. Not because citizens are unwilling to contribute, but because they no longer recognize the system as legitimate. The video brings this tension into sharp focus by drawing attention to a second, more painful contrast: how power is lived at the top versus how it is felt at the bottom. The narrator points to a senior public official whose children were reportedly educated in Switzerland at a cost of roughly $5 million for secondary schooling alone. One child, he notes, went on to Harvard. These are not accusations shouted in anger. They are observations made slowly, deliberately, with a single question hanging beneath them. How does this align with declared income? For an ordinary citizen, such a mismatch would trigger investigation. Tax records would be examined, sources of funds questioned, penalties imposed. But when the same imbalance appears at the highest levels of government, the response often feels very different. Quiet resignations, no prosecutions, no asset recovery, no public accounting. The political consequence of this pattern is devastating. It creates a system where resignation becomes an escape route rather than an admission of responsibility, where stepping aside is enough to end scrutiny, where public office becomes a one-way transfer of wealth shielded by silence. And once that perception takes root, every new tax feels less like civic duty and more like coercion. The issue raised on the floor of the House amplifies this resentment, because it suggests that even the formal checks meant to protect citizens, the legislature, the vote, the record, may be vulnerable. If laws can be altered after approval, then the safeguards people rely on are no longer firm. They are negotiable. Politically, this weakens institutions from the inside out. Lawmakers themselves begin to question their relevance. Why deliberate for days, page by page, if the final outcome can be rewritten elsewhere? Why vote if the vote can be overridden without notice? This is how democratic fatigue sets in, not with tanks in the streets or dramatic coups, but with paperwork that no longer means what it claims to mean. For citizens, the conclusion is simple and sobering. When systems protect power instead of people, patience runs out. Anger does not always explode, but it accumulates. And accumulated anger reshapes politics in unpredictable ways. The danger then is not only what may have been changed in a single tax law. It is what changes in the minds of the people once they believe the law itself can no longer be trusted. For viewers watching from the United States, this story may feel distant, rooted in a different political culture, a different continent, a different system. But the core question it raises is not foreign at all. In fact, it strikes at the heart of what Americans have long believed separates stable democracies from fragile ones. The principle is simple: the law must mean what it says, and it must say what was voted on. In the American system, transparency is not perfect, but it is fiercely defended. Congressional records are public, versions of bills are tracked, changes are debated openly. When discrepancies appear, they trigger investigations, court challenges, media scrutiny, and often lasting political consequences. The idea that a law could be quietly altered after passage without explanation would set off alarms across every branch of government. That reaction exists for a reason. Because when citizens cannot trace how a law came to be, they lose their ability to consent. And consent, not force, is the foundation of democratic legitimacy. From a global perspective, this is why the Nigerian episode resonates far beyond its borders. Around the world, trust in institutions is declining, not because people reject democracy outright, but because they increasingly question whether democratic procedures are being honored in practice. When legislative votes are treated as suggestions rather than final decisions, the gap between promise and reality widens. For many countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, this gap has had real consequences. It has fueled protests, it has weakened faith in elections, and in some cases it has pushed societies to search for alternative models of governance systems that promise order, accountability, or national control even at the expense of familiar democratic forms. This is the context in which stories like this must be understood. When people believe the rules can be changed behind closed doors, they stop arguing over policy details and start questioning the system itself. And once that happens, stability becomes fragile, not because citizens are unreasonable, but because predictability has disappeared. From Washington to Brussels, policymakers often speak about rule of law as an abstract standard, something to be encouraged elsewhere, monitored from afar. But rule of law is not a slogan. It is a daily discipline. It requires that processes be boring, predictable, and resistant to manipulation. The moment convenience replaces consistency, credibility erodes. For American viewers, there is also a quieter lesson here. Democracies do not fail all at once. They fray at the edges. A procedure bent here, a record altered there, an explanation delayed. Each incident alone may seem manageable. Together they create a pattern, and patterns shape expectations. When citizens expect opacity, they disengage. When they disengage, accountability weakens. And when accountability weakens, power concentrates, often invisibly. That is why this story matters beyond Nigeria. It is a reminder that the strength of any democratic system lies not in its rhetoric, but in its paperwork, in its records, in its willingness to let citizens see, verify, and challenge what is done in their name. The question then is not whether Nigeria faces a unique crisis. The question is whether the world is paying enough attention to the small procedural cracks that, left unattended, eventually become structural breaks. This story does not end with a speech on the floor of Parliament. It does not end with a promise that action will be taken. And it certainly does not end with a single tax law, because once the possibility is raised that a law can be changed after elected representatives have voted, something far more serious is set in motion. Not a legal dispute, but a moral reckoning. Laws are not just rules. They are agreements, quiet collective promises between a government and its people. When citizens pay taxes, they are not only contributing money, they are extending trust. Trust that the process is honest. Trust that the burden is shared. Trust that the system, however imperfect, is at least real. When that trust is shaken, compliance may continue, but belief does not. And without belief, no system lasts. The warning here is not dramatic, but it is profound. Democracies do not collapse only through coups or violence. They weaken when procedures lose meaning, when records no longer align, when accountability becomes optional, when resignation replaces justice, when citizens begin to suspect that decisions affecting their lives are made elsewhere by someone else after the debate is over. That is the danger line. Because once people stop believing the law reflects their voice, they stop seeing themselves as participants. They become spectators, or worse, obstacles. And history shows us what follows when large populations reach that conclusion. This is not just Nigeria's challenge, it is a universal one. Every society that values stability must constantly protect the integrity of its smallest processes, the wording of a bill, the accuracy of a record, the transparency of publication. These details may seem technical, even boring, but they are the load-bearing walls of democratic life. Remove them, and the structure may stand for a while, but it is already compromised. The lawmaker who spoke up did more than raise an objection. He reminded the nation that silence is how systems drift, that questioning the process is not rebellion, it is responsibility, and that vigilance, though uncomfortable, is the price of legitimacy. So the real question now is not what officials will say next. It is what citizens everywhere are willing to accept. If a law can change without explanation, will people still believe their vote matters? If taxes rise without clarity, will sacrifice still feel fair? And if institutions close ranks instead of opening records, how long before confidence gives way to cynicism? These are not Nigerian questions alone. They are democratic questions. If you believe transparency is non-negotiable, please share this story. If you believe accountability should never end with quiet resignation, subscribe. And in the comments, tell us honestly, at what point does a system stop deserving the trust of its people? Because once that line is crossed, rebuilding faith becomes far harder than protecting it in the first place.